The Galactic Coalition thought they were just cutting dead weight when they abandoned a frail human educator on the freezing surface of Oberon Beta. They expected him to die in hours. 50 years later, the Coalition returned to strip mine the dead moon, only to find a heavily armed fleet waiting for them. Robert Carmichael was not a soldier. He was a 52-year-old retired physics professor from Boston, contracted by the United Nations Deep Space Initiative as a cultural and scientific liaison. When Earth was unceremoniously absorbed into the Galactic Coalition, humanity was graded as a Tier 4 species, useful for manual labor, basic agriculture, and minor administrative tasks. The Coalition was ruthlessly utilitarian. If you could not provide overwhelming military force or advanced quantum engineering, you were expendable. Robert had been assigned to the Zephyrus, a deep space survey vessel commanded by Director Gideon, a rigid and calculating Centaurian officer whose translated Western name belied a cold, reptilian pragmatism. The ship's mission was to survey Oberon Beta, a fractured, dead moon orbiting a gas giant in the Perseus Arm. The Coalition was looking for heavy isotopes, and Robert was simply there to fulfill a bureaucratic mandate requiring a human observer on all Class B expeditions. Oberon Beta was a nightmare of a world. Its surface was a jagged expanse of obsidian rock, swept by constant howling winds of nitrogen and argon. The atmospheric pressure was crushing, and the temperature hovered just above the freezing point of carbon dioxide. On the fourth day of the expedition, the survey team was miles from the Zephyrus, drilling core samples near a massive canyon system. Robert was monitoring the seismic telemetry when the planet's magnetic field suddenly collapsed in a localized event. A violent ionospheric storm, a tempest of green and purple radiation, swept over the horizon faster than a shockwave. The evacuation order was immediate. "Pack the essential drives! Leave the heavy rigs!" Director Gideon's voice crackled through the comms. "We have 4 minutes before the EMP wave fries the ship's navigation matrix." Robert, weighed down by his bulky Class 3 environmental suit, struggled to keep up with the taller, physically superior Centaurian crew. His oxygen regulator was failing, his breath fogging the inside of his visor. He was lagging behind, dragging a cart of vital geological samples. "Oh, Director Gideon!" Robert gasped, his boots slipping on the treacherous black ice. "I need assistance. My suit's mobility servos are stalling." Gideon stood at the base of the ship's primary boarding ramp. He looked at Robert, then looked at his datapad. He was performing a brutal, split-second calculation. The human was 80 yards away. Waiting for him would take an additional 90 seconds. The storm was 60 seconds away. "The calculus does not favor you, Mr. Carmichael," Gideon said, his voice completely devoid of malice, which somehow made it infinitely worse. "Your species is abundant. This vessel is not. May the void offer you peace." "Wait, Gideon, no!" The heavy blast doors of the Zephyrus hissed shut. The hydraulic locks engaged with a sickening, final thud. Robert dropped his cart and sprinted, his lungs burning, his legs screaming in protest. He reached the landing gear just as the ship's primary thrusters ignited. The concussive wave of the exhaust threw him backward. He rolled across the jagged rocks, entirely helpless as he watched the massive dreadnought break atmosphere, leaving a streak of blue plasma against the turbulent, green-streaked sky. Then the storm hit. The EMP wave rolled over him in a silent explosion of static. His suit's HUD died. His external heaters powered down. He was alone, locked in a freezing dark, 20 light-years from the nearest human outpost. The silence that followed the storm was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. Robert lay in the dark for what felt like hours, waiting for the cold to claim him, but the basic insulation of his suit held, a testament to Lockheed Martin's over-engineered fabric. He forced himself to his feet. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. He was an educator, a man of logic and reason. He took an inventory of his situation. He had 3 days of emergency rations, a handheld kinetic cutter, and the abandoned terror drilling equipment the aliens had left behind in their haste. Most importantly, he had a Mark IV atmospheric processor, a seed engine designed to test soil viability in localized domes. For the first month, survival was an agonizing, minute-by-minute battle. Robert dragged the heavy seed engine into a shallow cave system to escape the brutal surface winds. He managed to hotwire the engine using the kinetic cutter's battery, creating a 50-foot dome of breathable air and marginal warmth inside the cavern. He ate synthetic nutrient paste and drank water extracted from the cave walls. He mapped the stars from the cave mouth, wrote formulas in the dust, and spoke out loud to keep his vocal cords and his mind from atrophying. But the crushing weight of isolation began to fracture his psyche. He was a teacher without students, a man without a people. He was fully prepared to walk out into the freezing storm and end it all until the 62nd day, when the shadows in the back of his cave began to move. They were not biological in any sense that Earth science would recognize. When Robert first illuminated the deep cavern with his portable flare, he saw them huddled against the crystal walls. There were dozens of them. They looked like jagged sculptures of silicon, quartz, and heavy metals, roughly humanoid but hunched and feral. They were remnants, leftovers of a forgotten civilization that had stripped this moon bare millions of years ago and died out, leaving these synthetic, biomechanical drones behind. Without their masters, they had devolved into primitive scavengers, feeding on trace geothermal energy to barely stay active in the cold. When Robert approached, they hissed, a sound like grinding gears and shattering glass, and backed away. They were terrified of his light. He could have easily ignored them. He could have barricaded his small section of the cave, but Robert Carmichael was, at his core, a teacher. He saw something in the glowing, dim optic sensors of the creatures. He didn't see monsters. He saw lost children. The next day, Robert didn't approach them. Instead, he sat at the edge of his atmospheric dome, where the warmth met the freezing cave air, and he placed a small, concentrated geothermal battery on the floor. He pushed it across the invisible line. For hours, nothing happened. Then, the largest of the silicon beings slowly crept forward. Its metallic joints clicked and groaned. It reached out a trembling, clawed hand, picked up the battery, and absorbed the energy. The creature's dim blue optic lights flared into a vibrant, warm gold. It looked at Robert, tilting its heavy head. "I'm Robert," he said, tapping his chest. The creature mimicked the motion, tapping its own crystalline chest, producing a hollow metallic chime. Robert named him Arthur, after an old colleague. The breakthrough happened rapidly after that. Robert realized that these beings, he began calling them the Lithoids, possessed incredibly advanced neural architecture that had simply been in sleep mode for millennia. They had no language, no culture, no purpose. They were empty vessels waiting for a program. Robert gave them more than a program. He gave them an education. Using a charred stick of carbon and the smooth, pale walls of the cavern, Robert began to teach. He started with basic mathematics. 1 line, 2 lines, 3 lines. To his astonishment, Arthur and the others grasped the concepts almost instantly. They didn't just learn, they devoured the information. Their processors, designed for complex planetary engineering, found a new purpose in human logic. Within 3 years, the cave had transformed. Robert had taught them basic English. Their vocal synthesizers were damaged, so they communicated through a series of rapid clicks, chimes, and deep, resonant hums. but they could understand every word he said. He taught them thermodynamics, structural engineering, and metallurgy. In return, the Lithoids kept Robert alive. They hunted down deep-core thermal vents, bringing him heat and synthesizing water. They integrated the broken coalition drilling equipment into their own bodies, upgrading themselves from hunched scavengers to towering, efficient machines of creation. By year 10, they weren't living in a cave anymore. They had built an underground city. It was a marvel of brutalist, functional architecture mixed with human aesthetic sensibilities. Robert sat on a makeshift throne of polished obsidian, not as a king, but as a revered elder. His hair was entirely white, his skin pale, his body frail, but his mind was sharper than ever. He didn't just teach them science, he taught them philosophy. He read them the works of Locke, Rousseau, and Marcus Aurelius from his datapad's memory. He taught them about human history, the wars, the art, the failures, and the triumphs. He taught them about the concept of justice, of mercy, and most importantly, of loyalty. Arthur, who had grown into a massive, imposing figure of polished black metal and glowing gold energy veins, became his prime student. "Teacher Robert," Arthur synthesized one evening, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that shook the floorboards of Robert's pressurized habitat. "The Coalition, the ones who abandoned you to the ice, you have taught us of human justice. Does their calculus of abandonment align with this justice?" Robert, coughing weakly into a rag, looked up at his giant student. "No, Arthur, it doesn't. They operate on cold pragmatism. They believe that if a life isn't immediately useful, it is worthless." "They are flawed," Arthur replied, his optic visors narrowing. "You had no physical strength. You had no weapons. By their calculus, you were worthless. Yet you gave us the spark. You gave us the universe." "That is the human way, Arthur. We build, we nurture, we protect the weak so they can become strong." "We understand," Arthur said, bowing his heavy head. "We will build. We will nurture. We will become strong." By year 20, Robert knew his time was running out. His body was failing under the strain of the moon's gravity and the synthetic diet. But he didn't die in despair. He spent his final years overseeing the greatest engineering project in the history of the sector. Using his knowledge of physics and their innate ability to manipulate the planet's core materials, the Lithoids tapped into the molten heart of Oberon Beta. They weren't just building a city anymore. They were turning the entire moon into a planetary engine. They built foundries, shipyards, and plasma batteries. They integrated coalition technology from the abandoned drills with human ingenuity and their own silicon-based architecture. When Robert Carmichael finally passed away at the age of 78, he was not alone in the freezing dark. He was surrounded by thousands of towering, glowing beings who lowered their heads in absolute silence. They did not bury him in the dirt. They built a mausoleum of indestructible quartz at the very center of their planetary core, bathing his stasis-sealed tomb in eternal, golden light. And then Arthur took command. The teacher was gone, but the lesson remained. The galaxy was dangerous. The coalition was ruthless. The children of Robert Carmichael decided it was time to finish their homework. They began to build a fleet. They had the patience of stone, the mathematical perfection of machines, and the fierce, protective soul of a human educator. They would wait. They knew the coalition would eventually return for the moon's resources. And when they did, the calculus was going to change. 50 years was a mere administrative rounding error in the vast bureaucratic expanse of the Galactic Coalition. To humanity, Half a century was a generation of struggle under the oppressive yoke of Tier 4 labor contracts. To the Coalition's Ministry of Resource Allocation, it was just the time it took for the paperwork to clear. Admiral Gideon, promoted from director after a series of ruthless, highly profitable resource acquisitions, stood on the command bridge of the Manifest Destiny, an Aegis Boeing retrofitted dreadnought leased by the Omnicorp Rio Tinto Deep Space Division. Gideon had aged remarkably little, his Centaurian physiology maintained by expensive genetic therapies. His pragmatism, however, had only calcified. "Entering the Perseus Arm, Admiral," announced Lieutenant Commander Bradley, a human navigator who had spent his entire life trying to prove his worth to his alien superiors. He kept his eyes locked on his console, afraid to meet Gideon's cold reptilian gaze. "We are dropping out of warp on the edge of the Oberon system." "Very well, Mr. Bradley," Gideon replied, clasping his hands behind his back. "Initialize the deep-core cracking lasers. We are here to strip Oberon Beta of its heavy isotopes. I want the mining drones deployed the moment we achieve standard orbit. We are behind schedule, and the Coalition does not reward delays." The Manifest Destiny was not alone. It was the flagship of a massive industrial armada, followed by 3 colossal factory ships and a dozen tactical escorts. They expected a dead, frozen rock. They expected silence. "Admiral," Bradley's voice trembled slightly, "I am getting anomalous readings from the target moon." Gideon sighed, the sound escaping as a sharp hiss of irritation. "Specify, Lieutenant Commander. Is it a localized ion storm? We experienced one during the preliminary survey 5 decades ago. Those distort long-range scans." "No, sir." The Lieutenant Commander's voice shook despite every effort to remain composed. "The ionosphere is completely stable. There are no electromagnetic disturbances, no solar interference. It's the planetary albedo. It's wrong. Every reading is wrong." Gideon's brow furrowed. "The surface temperature isn't negative 80 degrees Celsius anymore," the officer continued, swallowing hard. "It's radiating immense heat across the entire hemisphere. The thermal signature is increasing by the second. And the mass—" He paused, staring at the impossible figures. "The moon's mass has shifted. According to gravitational telemetry, it's significantly greater than it was during the last recorded survey." "Impossible!" Gideon snapped, the word echoing across the bridge. He strode toward the telemetry console, brushing startled technicians aside. Leaning over the display, he studied the tactical projection for himself, expecting to find a calibration error. Instead, the impossible numbers remained unchanged, silently confirming that the moon below was no longer the frozen, lifeless world they had abandoned decades earlier. Where there should have been a jagged, chaotic sphere of black obsidian, there was a perfectly smooth geometric grid of polished quartz and titanium alloy covering a third of the northern hemisphere. Massive heat vents, large enough to swallow heavy cruisers, glowed with a rhythmic, golden light. "Sensors are detecting energy signatures," Bradley said, his fingers flying across the keypad. "Massive power draws. It looks like a planetary engine, sir. And we have contacts, multiple contacts rising from the surface." "Pirates?" Gideon sneered. "Fools attempting to lay claim to Coalition property? Target the incoming vessels. Let us see how their shields hold up against industrial mining lasers." "Sir, these aren't pirate skiffs," Bradley whispered, all the blood draining from his face. "They are matching our dreadnoughts in tonnage. And they are mathematically perfect." From the dark side of Oberon Beta, a fleet emerged. They were not built like the blocky utilitarian ships of the Coalition, nor the sleek, fragile vessels of the inner core worlds. They were masterpieces of brutalist art, towering monoliths of black stone and glowing golden energy, seamless and devoid of visible thrusters. They moved not with exhaust trails, but by riding the gravitational waves of the gas giant itself, a theoretical application of astrophysics that the Coalition had dismissed as highly unstable. "Open a channel," Gideon ordered, a sliver of genuine apprehension finally piercing his arrogance. "Broadcast the Coalition's seal of authority." A harsh burst of static filled the bridge, followed by a profound, heavy silence. Then a voice spoke. It was deep, resonant, and synthesized, vibrating with a metallic undertone. It spoke in perfect, unaccented English. "You stand in the orbital space of New Avalon," the voice rumbled. "You are trespassing on sovereign territory." Gideon narrowed his eyes. "English? A human broadcast? This is Admiral Gideon of the Galactic Coalition. This moon and all its resources are the legal property of the Omnicorp Rio Tinto Division. Power down your vessels and prepare for boarding, or you will be destroyed." "Admiral Gideon," the voice replied, "we have waited 50 Earth years for your return. Your calculus is flawed." "Fire all forward batteries," Gideon roared, abandoning any pretense of negotiation. The Coalition escort ships unleashed a devastating barrage of plasma torpedoes and kinetic railgun slugs. The volley tore through the vacuum of space, a blinding display of military supremacy aimed directly at the lead monolith. The projectiles never hit. Exactly 4 kilometers from the black ships, the torpedoes simply stopped. They didn't detonate. They were caught in a localized, absolute zero stasis field. The kinetic slugs were subjected to a sudden, violent inversion of localized gravity, tearing themselves apart into harmless dust. They deflected it using a Faraday-Einstein manipulation matrix, Bradley gasped, staring at the raw data. "That's theoretical physics from Earth. Nobody has ever weaponized it." "We do not wish to destroy you, Admiral Gideon," the voice echoed over the comms. "We were taught the value of mercy, but we were also taught the necessity of discipline. Your vessels are now tethered." Gideon felt the deck lurch beneath his boots. The navigation systems went dark. The hum of the warp drives died out in a pathetic whine. "Report," Gideon demanded. "Main power is offline," a technician shouted. "Our engines are dead. They've overridden our systems using a closed-loop quantum cipher." "Sir, we are being pulled into their docking bays." The massive black monolith had opened a glowing, golden maw in its bow. The manifest destiny, the pride of the Coalition fleet, was being dragged helplessly into the belly of the unknown ship, caught in an unbreakable tractor beam of weaponized gravity. The boarding was swift and completely bloodless, terrifyingly so. The blast doors of the manifest destiny were not blown open with explosives. They were simply unmade, the molecular bonds of the titanium dissolved by targeted sonic resonance. When the invaders stepped onto the bridge, the Coalition security forces dropped their weapons in sheer awe. They were giants, standing 9 feet tall, composed of jagged, polished obsidian and glowing quartz. The Lithoids moved with a terrifying, silent grace. They wore no armor, for they were armor. Their heavy, clawed hands held no rifles, yet the air around them hummed with latent, lethal kinetic energy. The largest of them radiating a deep, golden light from the veins running through its chest, stepped forward. It looked down at Gideon. "You are Gideon," the creature stated, its optic visors narrowing. "I am a representative of the Galactic Coalition," Gideon spat, though he instinctively backed away. "You are committing an act of war. What are you, a rogue AI collective?" "We are the children of the teacher," the giant replied. "I am Arthur." Arthur reached out, his massive stone hand moving faster than Gideon could track, and lifted the admiral off the deck by the collar of his pristine uniform. "Bring him," Arthur commanded the other Lithoids. "He must see." Gideon was dragged through the docking tubes and into the heart of the lithoid vessel. He expected a cold, mechanical interior, a hive of mindless drones. Instead, he saw art. The walls were inscribed with complex mathematical theorems, Maxwell's equations, the Fibonacci sequence, Newton's laws of motion, interwoven with murals depicting a frail, white-haired human man sitting by a fire, teaching giant creatures of stone. They brought Gideon to the surface of Oberon Beta, to a massive subterranean cathedral of light at the center of the planetary engine. In the center of the vast chamber stood a magnificent mausoleum carved from indestructible, crystal-clear diamond. Its flawless walls caught the soft golden light, scattering it into shimmering reflections that danced across the polished floor. Inside, resting in serene silence beneath a gentle, warm glow, lay the perfectly preserved body of Robert Carmichael. He wore the same simple, faded, deep space jumpsuit he had worn on his final mission, untouched by time. His hands were folded neatly across his chest, and his face bore an expression of quiet peace, as though he had merely fallen asleep after a long journey, rather than died centuries ago. "Do you recognize him?" Arthur asked coldly, forcing Gideon down onto his knees before the tomb. Gideon stared through the transparent diamond at the human, his brilliant, calculating mind racing to connect scattered memories and forgotten records. His eyes widened as recognition slowly took hold. The observer," he whispered hoarsely. "Carmichael. From the survey mission. He was dead weight. He was left behind." "He was a teacher," Arthur's voice boomed, echoing off the cavern walls. "By your calculus, he was worthless. He possessed no physical strength. He possessed no weapons. You abandoned him to the ice because he cost you 90 seconds. Arthur knelt, bringing his glowing optic sensors level with Gideon's face. "You left him with nothing but dirt and broken drills. But he possessed something your coalition lacks: empathy, logic, the desire to build rather than merely extract. He found us in the dark. We were empty, starving remnants. He gave us warmth. He gave us language. He gave us physics." Arthur gestured to the sprawling, hyper-advanced city around them, to the fleet in orbit, to the planetary engine drawing power from the moon's core. He built a Tier 1 civilization out of rocks and discarded math. "Tell me, Admiral Gideon, what does your calculus say about his worth now?" Gideon was trembling. The realization of his monumental error was crashing down upon him. The Coalition had categorized humanity as Tier 4 laborers, barely above beasts of burden. Yet here was proof that a single, elderly human educator had possessed the intellectual and philosophical capacity to awaken a dormant race of mechanical gods and teach them to conquer the stars. What do you want?" Gideon stammered. "Revenge? Will you destroy the Coalition?" "The teacher did not believe in vengeance," Arthur said, rising to his full, towering height. "He taught us the principles of human justice. He taught us to protect the weak. Humanity is currently enslaved by your labor contracts. They are treated as expendable." Arthur turned to a massive communications console, a slab of black glass that instantly linked to the Coalition's deep space buoy network. "We are not here to destroy the Coalition," Arthur declared, and his voice began to broadcast on every open frequency across the galaxy. "We are here to audit it." The transmission reached Earth, Centauri Prime, and the glittering spires of the Coalition capital. "Hear this, Galactic Coalition. We are the Lithoids of New Avalon, the students of Robert Carmichael of Earth. Effective immediately, the species known as humanity is under our direct protection. You will elevate Earth to Tier 1 status. You will dissolve all indentured labor contracts. You will grant them a seat on the High Council." Gideon swallowed hard. "And if the council refuses?" Arthur looked down at the Centaurian, the golden light in his chest pulsing with raw, unbridled power. "If they refuse, we will apply human physics to your economy. We will lock every coalition trade route in localized stasis. We will turn your mining fleets into dust. We have the patience of stone, Admiral. We can wait centuries. You cannot survive a month." Arthur turned back to the tomb of his teacher, bowing his heavy head in reverence. "The class is dismissed, Gideon. Go tell your masters what humanity is truly capable of." The coalition forces were sent back in a single, unarmed transport ship. The Manifest Destiny remained in orbit around New Avalon, transformed into a museum dedicated to the frail physics professor who had shown them the light. Within a week, the Galactic Coalition collapsed into a panic. Within a month, Earth was granted Tier 1 status. The calculus of the galaxy had changed forever, not by the firing of a weapon, but by a teacher who simply refused to let his students fail in the dark. The universe thought humanity was weak, but they forgot one crucial thing. Humans are the greatest builders and teachers in the cosmos. If you loved this HFY story of survival, intellect, and the unbreakable bond between a teacher and his students, smash that like button. Share this video with a fellow sci-fi fan, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more epic, original HFY stories every single week. Stay stellar, and we'll see you in the next adventure.